don't expect AI to be the thing that does everything, and replace everyone anytime soon. And even if ever, I think.
A loan getting underwritten 100% by AI, no human involved.
If I have code that can do what I need every single time, I'm not paying for tokens per run or per use of AI.
The best thing you can do for the population of appraisers, or the incoming population of appraisers, fix the rate environment. It has been a disaster for almost 4 years now. Episode 93 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times with a special July 4th, 250th birthday of America, Jeff. Happy 4th. Good to be with you.
Yeah, happy birthday, America. Definitely good to be here, even though it's early on the recognized holiday for the 4th. It's been interesting, Mike. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast or not, but I've gotten the bug to do a little bit of historical dive. I've been listening to a pretty in-depth biography on George Washington. I kind of sat down and realized, like, I've known of him, kind of what you pick up in school history classes and that sort of thing. But the timing has been kind of fun to be listening to his life and experiences, and leading into the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the country. And really fascinating. I'm surprised at how many parallels I see between what they were dealing with, even back then, and what I see in today's political, climate and environment. I think we sometimes see, there's a lot of polarization for sure, and I'm not necessarily a fan of that. And yet I'm just reading about massive, divisions between Hamilton and Jefferson in Washington's cabinet. And I mean, there was just a lot of political divisiveness even back then, absent all the technology and ways of amplifying some of the messages that are out there now. But more parallels than maybe I was expecting to find as I dove into it.
I think always listening to those guys, like just the decisions and direction they were having to go with. I think about like that Jeff Bezos, like disagree and commit kind of thing, where at some point you've got to make a decision and go, and there's like wildly differing opinions. But in their case, it was like, disagree and commit means I'm going to what I think is certain death and failure, so the stakes were way higher for just personal safety or longevity compared to the whatever the things are we're talking about here. So, in this day and age. And so the stakes were just so high. And like when they do these things, doing them because they think they're right, not because they think they're going to work. I think that seems like the assessment that each were having to make. And, so there's a lot of principle in that. And I think there are parallels this day and age that are much lighter in terms of the seriousness of the outcomes, but things that I draw a lot of inspiration from.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And a lot of, it's interesting to hear Elon describe starting SpaceX or Tesla and telling investors, I think there's a very low chance of this actually happening, but it's good for humanity, and so we should pursue it for that, that same principled reason and decision making. And it's turned out to have obviously been very successful in those cases. But it was that principled, based decision making initially that he went on, and certainly founding fathers did. And I totally agree. I mean, the stakes are way different, but even just competing in business, there are stats and around how many new businesses fell within the first year and 5 years. And, it's just, survival is not that easy in a highly competitive environment. And again, it's not life and death decisions, but, from a business perspective and employment perspective, impact on people that you employ and work with, they're not insignificant consequences either. And so, a lot of these are high stakes games.
Yeah. Jeff, and I mean, we, even at Acurity, like we draw inspiration from just doing things because it seems like the right thing to do. And so delivering quickly just feels like it's something that the market should have, a service level that the market should have. And, recently we've been, what I think it's like 65% of our appraisals around the country are delivered the same day that they're inspected. And it's awesome to do because we just think it's the right thing to do. But, Is there a direct, market you're serving in that way differently? No, I don't think so. But it's just, you think it's the right thing to do. And I don't know. This is very, very far stretch from whatever George Washington was doing. But I don't know. So then to connect to, I was at an appraisal yesterday, and we don't talk about these things very often. But one of the great joys, I think, of this job that isn't talked about much is kind of meeting homeowners in the comfort of their home for a brief moment, and so you just have such interesting, sometimes very deep conversations, and you might wonder in the middle of it, how did we get to this, and how are we talking about this one way or another? But at least for me, it happens frequently on these visits. But the builder and owner was from Venezuela, I think, came over 18 years ago, but was telling me about an experience 25 years ago in Venezuela that caused him and his family to come over. Was his brother getting kidnapped, and he was getting chills on his arm, retelling the story about how he was on the phone with the negotiators. Basically, I guess the way this goes is they determine a family has money, they kidnap, and then they ransom, hold out for ransom. And so there's this ever increasing ransom amount. And, he remembered the moment where he went to the guys and said, I have $25,000, take that or barbecue my brother. And his mom was in the room hearing him negotiate with, it's just, so he was like retelling that and, and kind of emotional doing it in the thing. But so just, came here is, doing very well for himself, it seems, and just a great story and kind of a cool example of the kind of things we walk into as appraisers.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've got a counter to that just briefly. I was looking at a house just the other day. The homeowner had some kind of evocative photos of herself in the bathroom. Well, not even photo, but like full blown, like big poster image type things. And I was like, oh, geez, it's tricky, like getting pictures that you have to that don't include, some of the stuff that you certainly don't want to include. I don't know, maybe she was, proud of the artistic work that she was doing, but I was just, it was one of those things I was like, I didn't need to see that. And I did, inadvertently anyway. So I kind of strategically took the photo and moved on.
Oftentimes the embarrassment from those things you would assume would be present is not.
She wasn't following me around, but didn't seem to have a care in the world about it, that I was, wandering through and having exposure to the intimate stuff she had up on the wall and whatnot. So
that's funny.
Just a day in the life, no doubt.
Yeah, you bet. Well, boy, we hadn't done this in a little bit, but wanted to remind the listeners of the podcast companion newsletter that we have. TUG is stands for Two Uninteresting Guys, but TUG is our podcast open claw agent colleague that is helping us with a whole number of things and doing a great work. It's a bit of an experiment on our side to see where AI can help. We've chosen this specifically because it's siloed away from our appraisal work. We can't break too much, but boy, Jeff, I've really liked this newsletter, and particularly a segment that we have put together that is called Tugging at the Thread. And so it's taking a topic that we discuss, and Tug does a bunch of deep dive research and compiles an article going far deeper into the topic that we discuss. And this most recent one was the language in the housing bill that is on the president's desk for signature, which is the unlicensed trainee appraiser, and what on earth that could mean. And so Tug just does a great job of going back to the FIREA, what I think it's 89, and things that it left off or defined poorly, and how that's led to a whole host of problems or interpretations that sort of led to, like, Mr. Fontana, who joined us, who's working on state harmonization and appraisal and all this sort of stuff. And it's just a really, really intelligent look in my mind that is initiated by us, curated by us, but does a lot of deep dive research that I think we'd be hard pressed to find the time to do.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's for me, one of the things that stands out, Mark, is, topic is driven or derived from the podcast, things that we are talking about and care about. And then there is some back and forth, on curating and pulling this together. And in the case, the most recent one, just fun to see, the pull from the historical data, a prior guest on the podcast, around the topic, pulling all of that together, in this article. And so Been a lot of fun. Would invite anybody who hasn't to and would like to sign up for the newsletter. Part of what it does too, and it's kind of a work in progress, but in my mind, a brief summary of the topics that we cover on the podcast to help if somebody wants a quick glance or a quick update as far as what's been discussed. There's that, and then the deeper dive tugging at the thread article has been, I think, for us the most fun to pull together and create for people to be able to be reading. But yeah, it's been a real fun effort. Would definitely encourage people. We've got the sign up here. I think I ought to make a note to Tug. I was tempted to maybe even have him post an apology for having a number of invites sitting in the inbox, but not yet refined enough to accept and then add those. So I think we've got that problem fixed. But just kind of an ongoing learning operation for us and for him as far as what we think is working versus what we discover needs some fixing on that.
Tug's posts on LinkedIn, Twitter also, although I think that's less followed, but the posts on LinkedIn are great. I've enjoyed them. They're pulling articles that are interesting. There's a little bit of discussion back and forth in the comments. And it's not a bad follow. And if you don't have time to listen to us blather on for 50 minutes a week, I think the podcast companion can be a replacement for the podcast in newsletter too. Just a quick dive onto what we're talking about and stay current. I think that's probably the highest and best use of the podcast is staying current on more national topics when real estate professionals are more local, location, and trying to stay abreast of everything that's going on here. So we're trying to do that. And I think that this can be a 5-minute or 10-minute sort of catch up weekly instead of the longer listen when you're driving around.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great way to think about what the newsletter can be, relative to the podcast itself. So a big thank you to those that have subscribed already. It was fun to see a number of them in there. I was pleasantly surprised to see some familiar names that were just waiting for the invite to be accepted. And like I say, we've resolved that. But if you're interested, a fun subscribe, I think, for sure.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the show notes. It's a pretty long URL right now. Probably need to address that. But baby steps here in trying to increase our reach one way or another. And Tug is helping us do that. And I think doing a really good job. There are plenty of accounts that I know are at minimum heavily AI assisted. And I am excited to read those each day as they're coming out. So that's kind of an interesting development. I am not just looking for a human-only curated message one way or another.
Yeah, it comes down to the quality of the content and how relevant it is, and so makes sense in what we're consuming, and we hope it makes sense in what we're putting out there as well.
Well, Jeff, I wanted to. We have not talked about rates in several weeks. They're not doing much, but really this is the prediction of where rates go. I think the common thesis right now is that we might be on the road to rate hikes this year because of inflation that's out there and a number of other factors. I have held for a while that in fact I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there even is a possibility that we could see rate drops from the Fed at some point this year. That's assuming a couple of things: the Middle East conflict getting resolved. I don't know if we can say that is resolved or not. If we think it's resolved today, I don't think anybody has confidence that same thing will be true tomorrow. It's a whole different analysis. But Fed Chair Warsh was on a conference stage this week and is echoing a familiar sentiment that I have been seeing as he makes the rounds there. And it is commenting on artificial intelligence role or consideration in his Fed. That is what he is trying to impart on his Fed, is that they should be considering the AI impact one way or another. And in the comments, particularly, in fact, I'll quote this: "We are only in the first or second inning of this revolution," I think meaning the AI revolution. "We see a boom in capital expenditures, and it's not looking inflationary. The U.S. will be the big winner." And so essentially what that's saying is, look, we're spending all of these hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars in data centers, moving chips back over here and all of this sort of stuff. There's tons of expense. And that usually is very inflationary. And they are not seeing that at all. And that is, I think the reasons are that we're getting a lot of productivity gains, even in the first and second inning of implementation of these AI tools one way or another. And so this is, when you put this together with all the other interviews he's been doing, this is essentially saying, man, you can't, this rate hikey environment is, I'm not sure that Warsh agrees with that. It's that there are other considerations here, and raising rates into this productivity gain would be a really, really big mistake.
Yeah, you bet. And I did listen to his first full interview after the Fed's first meeting with him as the chair, and it's so challenging to go to the source for everything. And so I think what happens is we get in the mode of just hearing what somebody said about what somebody else is doing. And I mean, that's kind of the nature of news and, the way that we can try to stay up to date generally. But it was insightful to listen to his comments in particular, and setting up a lot of what you're discussing here, Mark. I think they created 4 or maybe 5 different specific task forces to address a number of different things. But one of them specifically is the data and the data points that they're looking at around the measurement of inflation. Pros and cons to whatever you choose to go with for sure. But I think he's saying, hey, we ought to reevaluate how are we even measuring inflation, and then how should that guide our decisions around interest rate policy, very specifically. So, there's going to be more information, and I think the Fed is going to evolve a little bit between now and the end of the year with how they're operating versus what they did, previously. So, there's that setting up. One thing that came out, I think just yesterday, was the jobs report that had lower employment numbers than were anticipated. It was in the 50,000 range, and they were anticipating, twice that having been created last month, and a revision down in prior months' jobs reports as well, all of which setting up for making it a little less likely from a traditional perspective or kind of calculus to increase the rates. I think that the prediction markets were even showing a decreased likelihood of a Fed rate increase recently. But I think, to your point, Warsh is looking at this and saying, look, there are macro forces at play that are setting up for a rate cut, even though the traditional calculus would be, well, maybe we hold rates steady, maybe we bump them a little bit to counter what really has been this persistent inflation challenge that really hasn't been tamed yet. Last thing I'll say on that is just he was very committed to getting to the 2% target before making other substantive changes around, should the target be different than it is, as a way of not just kind of backing out of, well, maybe we just want it to be 3% now because we can't get to the 2 or something.
Yeah. Not redefining inflation, not accepting a new normal for sure. I see many in the deep AI is going to change everything camp, saying that we're going to have real deflation problems at some point. And, I think Warsh's comments are not dismissing that as ridiculous, is all that I would say. And so whenever I see Warsh talking and sort of coming in with this being one of several core points of his chairmanship, I don't know. It's interesting to me because a lot of these AI guys are just, doomerism isn't the right word because it's not all doom, but it's just totally change everything perspective that I think can sound really fanciful, and I dismiss it. I think the human nature would be to dismiss so much change so quickly. And, I think it's notable that a different data point from a whole different area is saying, I'm not so fast. I think it's a consideration.
You bet. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, well, I think that can take us a little bit into the artificial intelligence discussion. We haven't talked about this for a little bit also, Jeff. And, there's so much change here. And I think there's this ongoing analysis and necessary curiosity of, especially from a real estate professional, appraisers for sure. It's like, well, boy, if I am not deeply invested in this or integrated this into what I do every day, am I getting left behind? Have I already been left behind? And I think that is the base feeling for anybody that's in this, and that doesn't have a team of technologists behind them building a bunch of stuff. And so, I think we analyze this constantly. from that perspective of like, let's not get left behind. Let's use the tools that are available to us, but responsibly, and make sure we don't we don't get, I know we don't miss out, and so we have a couple of things that were interesting along these topics from a high level. I think about this the CEO of Palantir, which is a big AI data company, coming out late this week and talking about how nobody really wants Anthropic and like Claude and Grok and OpenAI and ChatGPT. They don't want those language models to be central to any of their companies. It is giving too much of their proprietary stuff to these big models that are proving themselves to be strategically geared towards learning what works and building it, and selling it themselves one way or another. And so any enterprise is going to want to have an open source type language model that they house in their corporate silos, have full control over, digests all of their company information that never leaves that silo. And that the business model that's succeeding so well early on here is really not what the corporate world wants. And the CEO of Microsoft, Satya's been writing blog posts about this recently, and almost against OpenAI, who is their primary partner over the last 2 or 3 years here, and saying, look, and it's like, the benefit of Microsoft is you have this co-pilot wrapped by an ecosystem that is protecting your data all the way through. And so there's a lot there. There's a lot there. But you couple that with people experimenting with AI and implementing and finding out how far they should go. Dustin Harris, the Appraiser Coach, is someone you and I have followed for a long time. I don't think you can be an appraiser without following him. He's had great reach for many years now. Had a great article in the Appraisal Buzz that I was working through a 90-day internal experiment, Jeff. And what was that? How did it turn out?
Yeah, it's been fun to see. I've been watching as he had set this up, and the case study here is an appraisal company specifically. I think it applies to about any really operation, and so his test was, and we're going to have an opportunity to dive a little deeper on this, so I will try not to butcher too much of what he actually did and learned in the process. But just from the article in the Appraisal Buzz, the test was, can I create a fully supported appraisal company able to do at least $100,000 in annual revenue with only one appraiser and everything else augmented and supported by artificial intelligence? Called it, or kind of dubbed it, Project Prometheus. And so went through this, and then basically the article was describing the learnings and the takeaway. And really interesting that I think his summary was, I can do 80 to 85% of the stuff really well, but when it falls down, it really falls down in critical ways. And so it's much less about ultimately taking the human completely out of the loop and replacing the human with the AI, so much as augmenting or lifting the human by the AI tools that can be created and generated, because you just can't afford certain levels of errors and mess ups that really can be catastrophic in the process. And so he kind of reframes the question around not so much can I, but even should I try, or is it a fool's errand in a sense to try to be creating something that just replaces all of the jobs that I would otherwise be creating in terms of a support team to make an appraisal business happen. In some sense, it wasn't terribly surprising, but in another, it really resonated with, I think, what our experience and experimentation has been around this. It's not a don't learn and try to implement tools into your business, but it's certainly a don't expect AI to be the thing that does everything, and replace everyone anytime soon, and even if ever, I think, Mark.
Well, especially in these industries where the margin of error allowance is essentially zero, and real estate appraisal for sure is falls into that category. Health services fall into that, financial services fall into that, and so there's a lot of them. And I think even with the way that we selected how to experiment with an open claw agent and what tug is, Jeff, I think we've done a really good job, and I think we were to pat ourselves on the back. I think we were smart in the way that we applied it, because we selected an avenue that there is tolerance for margin of error. He replied to someone in a LinkedIn thread and truncated the reply right on accident. Okay, we can fix that. So but if you truncate an important analysis in an appraisal, well, that's everything, right? You're sitting in front of the state board defending your license, right? So there's just no room for that. And so I think corporations, if they set out to have AI come in and just say, hey, here's the number of employees that we replaced, this is the 93% of the AI initiatives that produce no ROI, according to that McKinsey survey, right? Where it's just poor implementation, not very well thought out. It's investing in AI for AI's sake. I think you got to be very smart about how you do this. And so, Jeff, I had teed up a week ago a really interesting LinkedIn post that I saw, that was someone describing a loan getting underwritten 100% by AI, no human involved. You could think, oh, great, wow, we really are, the future is here, sort of thing. But the point of the post was that this was not as intended. The loan was made, the loan was approved by AI, but that wasn't the intention at all. It was the human supervision inserted into the loop just sort of didn't do its job. And that this, before AI and now AI here, this is human habit or tendency is, okay, the better AI gets, the less incentive as a supervisor I have to make sure I'm overseeing and looking at, well, he's done this right 150 times. I really don't need to check this anymore, do I? And then you just don't look at it, right? And so you just start rubber stamping. And this is a real problem. And I think something that Dustin Harris uncovered, and where if I think it's 82% of the work he found was good, 18% was not good. Well, the more that moves to 99%, the less you're going to check it, and the more likely you're going to run into a problem where you send something out that had to have been reviewed that was not.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what happens is, it's that last mile of delivery and logistics that's the hardest, the most complex to solve for. And I think it's going to be the last 5 or 10% in AI that becomes critical, that is in a lot of ways the hardest to solve for. And so I don't think that it's imminent that that we get to that place. But as I think about it, Mark, when was the last time you went in and double checked the math, either in an appraisal, on an appraisal grid where it's built in and calculated, it's just adding and subtracting, or in an Excel sheet? I think these tools that we're comfortable with and have used for decades, we're very confident in. I think Excel probably gets the math right every time. Same thing with appraisal software and that sort of thing. Though there is the potential for error, that's decades of kind of proven out accuracy and consistency. And we're not anywhere near that with AI. Now, we might in decades to come, get to that place, but I think those prophesying a radical shift in, we're not going to need human labor anymore in the next 2 to 3 years. It's way overly stated and overly optimistic, and I think pretty consistent with what Dustin's experience was, in going through this.
Excel, which is essentially formula based, those things don't hallucinate. That the formula can change underneath you in weird ways, but it's from the beginning you can assume a level of expected outcome that you cannot. And one of our own technologists at our firm has been building an application, and I was assuming that the product itself would be using AI on a per unit basis, but the decision is no. I think the concept here is to not use AI on a consistent basis, because you can't afford the hallucination. And so the goal is to use AI to build the application that doesn't need AI on an ongoing basis, so that you can rely on it in the way that we need to. And so these are really important nuances, I think, for any of us as real estate professionals trying to navigate how to get there. And I think Dustin Harris has come to a similar conclusion through experiment, which is great. It's a thoughtful way to implement. It is an assistant tool. It is not a replacement.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the interesting insights that I had, was that AI unlocked our team members' ability to create the code that they never would have done otherwise. I mean, it was an AI unlock in a sense, but it wasn't an ongoing use of AI. And it wasn't just a hallucination, but there was also the cost aspect of it as well that said, look, if I have code that can do what I need every single time, I'm not paying for tokens per run or per use of AI, which also introduces the potential for hallucination. And so, it was a reframing of the kind of the way I was assuming it was working too, and probably the smartest way, the best way to do it in the first place. And so a lot of learning in the nuance and in the weeds as you dig into these.
Jeff, I don't know. I don't know if this leak was real or not, but this certainly speaks to a trend of limitless token spend for these language model tools to now. There was a leak out of Tesla or the General Musk Industries, where Elon is saying you are allowed to spend no more than $20 per week in tokens. Boy, that is a very different thing than Jensen Huang saying, if you don't spend 500,000 a year, you're not a productive enough coder with me. And so I do think there's like, let's work smart in this trend that way. And I don't know, on the trend that we're on, I think is the trend line that we're on. What we're talking about is real. OpenAI hired Andre Karpathy as a recursive loop builder, I think. And so that essentially means setting up the code so that the language model can ingest and get better on its own. And you hear Elon and Grok talking about this, and Cursor talking about this constantly. This is what they're efforting towards. And so I think this trend line that we're currently on could shift drastically because the AI starts building upon itself and no longer needs the human in the loop. Could solve hallucinations in a meaningful way and could be more impactful and reliable than what we are today. So, we just keep a steady eye towards where this is and deal with what we've got in the moment, being mindful that it could change on a dime.
Yeah, it's the nature of the technology evolution for sure, but I think that's the proper framing of it for where we're at in the moment.
Yeah, very good. Well, Jeff, we spent a long time last week and probably had a little more fun than we should have talking about the appraiser components of the housing bill that we recorded the day of the expected signing of the bill from the president. And of course, the rug was pulled out from under us while we were recording, little known to us. That bill still is not signed a week later. I'm sure it will be, but I don't know. It's being held hostage for the Save America Act, which is the voting bill. So I think it's all worthwhile analysis because I think it is going to be signed. We thought, at least I did, thought that it was a pretty important enhancement to existing law and regulation. We've had some nice response from listeners, and even talking about the AQB questions that are out there that all sort of feed into this idea of pretty meaningful change in our industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right, and it was funny. I mean, just a little behind the scenes look. You'd sent a message to me right after we recorded last week saying, did we just waste our time recording this because of the announcement that Trump wasn't going to sign? And with as much support as there was, it does seem inevitable that this does go into law. And I think it's something that Trump actually wants. He's just trying to leverage it for political reasons. So fine. I mean, that's kind of the way that these things play out. But it doesn't seem like there's a likely path for it not being implemented, which was really interesting to see. We did get a message, a reach out from a listener, Mark. So shout out to Mark. Not this one, but fun to see some of the analysis. And I think I'll just observe here that right now the minimum criteria to become an appraiser is out for public comment through the AQB second exposure draft of what they're thinking. We talked through some of those things, and the reason that you do this in the first place is you get intake, you get comments, hopefully that are thoughtful and insightful from stakeholders from all different, perspectives, appraisers and users of appraisal services, and anybody else wanting to, from the comment or from the public. And I think that it can provide important insight into, potential oversights or implications, or maybe misunderstandings around what's intended, and all of those sorts of things. I thought it was maybe worth just talking through a few of the points that listener Mark was identifying as at least things for consideration. And one of the things I appreciated was that it was pretty thoughtful analysis, and it wasn't just don't change this because I hate it and I hate change, but it was like, look, there are the potential for problems here. And a lot of this was focused around an alternative pathway to getting appraisal experience. It's not removing experience altogether, but it's saying, in addition to traditional supervisor, PAREA, practicum, what if we provided a way for just to get to the license level, which is the entry, kind of the first level into the profession? What if we had an entity administer kind of a demonstration report, capstone report writing project, where an applicant would write 3 appraisal reports. One of them had to be on a complex property, and submit that. And if those are approved, then that would be basically the pathway to getting the experience. Some interesting challenges there, but I guess I'll pause for a second. And any initial reaction or thoughts that you had on that, Mark?
Jeff, I have been a very big proponent of getting experience far more accessible to folks. I think a big problem that we have is that it is controlled by a supervisor who's disincentivized from allowing access to people that want to get it in the industry. I mean, you're training your competition just for starters. Not to mention, the industry on the residential side doesn't allow you to use a trainee in the process. So they disincentivize new people coming in and then complain about no new people coming in. So it's just sort of a problem of irony all the way through. But being a proponent of all of that, I generally agree that minimizing the experience necessary is not the answer. It's not easy to be an appraiser. And there is all sorts of stuff learned by a wide breadth of experience, in a capstone or a few things like that, I think really do minimize. So, I think we just need to be thoughtful. And I appreciated the commentary. I'm going to try to pronounce Mark's last name, Giannini. I do appreciate the thoughtful response. I'm sure I butchered your last name. Sorry about that. But it highlights the comment process, as you said, Jeff, and the exposure drafts being put out there. And, I think all of these entities similar to the foundation consider all of these comments, read every single word, and consider them when they're trying to help make the next set of rules that we all are governed by.
Yeah, 100%. They I know for sure that they do. That they read every single one, and really what they want are the thoughtful analysis, like what Mark has put together here. And one of the things he was pointing out was, like, there is the potential for abuse. What if in writing these 3 test reports, an applicant just has a ghostwriter, somebody else write the report and then submit it on their behalf? What if they lean excessively on artificial intelligence to produce the report, not really knowing, what role that they had or not, or are guided or coached by an experienced appraiser? What if the entities, kind of like continuing education providers, have perceived differences in standards of what it takes to get your appraisal reports approved or passed? And if somebody's perceived as being easier, does everybody just go to the lowest common denominator there? Stuff like that. You're worried about a potential conflict of interest. What if these entities that are kind of reviewing and then signing off on these demonstration reports have a perceived conflict of interest in, then also turning around and hiring appraisers, and are there issues there? Well, the thing I think I appreciated the most was the recommendation that, these things ought to be at least addressed in how it's administered, from the AQB and then at the state level. And I think there are reasonable solutions that can be had there. So I saw this as a good example of not just saying, hey, this sucks, or hey, there's problems with this, or no, don't do it, but here are potential pitfalls or areas that could be a problem, and some potential solutions, or at least things that ought to be addressed, at the very minimum. And that is the purpose in this entire process, is to flesh out all of the potential unintended consequences or opportunities for abuse, and then proactively address them before it's a problem down the road. And then you're kind of reactively trying to fix a problem of your own creation. And so great analysis, definitely appreciate it. I thought it was very, insightful and well done. And all of this is still in the consideration phase. I think there is some pressure for the AQP to make a final decision and move from the Trump administration and on. Whether that has any influence or not, we'll see. But I think it's in everybody's best interest to have a well-formulated plan, but not take longer than is necessary to get it put into place.
Jeff, I don't hear enough from the foundation that, hey, look, we have already made monumental changes through Perea and Practicum. Let's let those take hold and see what sort of impact they have, not just keep going before. I mean, that is my general outlook is, major changes have happened. It is now accessible. Let's see what impact that has. And as the foundation said in their white paper responding to the president's executive order, it's like, help the rate environment. That is the best thing you can do for the population of appraisers, or the incoming population of appraisers. Fix the rate environment. It has been a disaster for almost 4 years now, and really was a disaster 4 years before that led to the current version of the disaster. That's what we need in my mind, and keep this in consideration, the experience rethinking, but act before we know what the already substantial changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mark. They've been in place, but not long enough to bring in a massive amount of new appraisers. And there's potential, challenges in any of those models. Every single model for getting experience has strengths, and it definitely has weaknesses. And so we've opened the aperture quite a bit on the ability to get that experience. I think it's important that there is the experience component, but we do need to let it play out. And a lot of the cited reasons for, hey, we need to make it more accessible to get more appraisers in, is because of a declining population trend. But your point is spot on in my mind, that a lot of that's a market force. And even the GSE representatives have said, look, it's not that their policies have necessarily resulted in a lot lower appraisals, although, with waivers and stuff, that is a factor that, might escalate in the future. But they point to the historic trends of overall volume and loan applications submitted to their portals as being way down. We've talked about it, 30-year lows and that sort of thing. It just doesn't feel like there's a shortage in the moment because of a low interest rate, or but a low volume environment. And so the market forces are making it challenging for people to get in, and it's a financial analysis as much as anything else in the moment. That will change at some point, but I think we have opportunities and options in place to bring appraisers online, still requiring experience and hopefully as well trained as possible, but able to adjust to the demand better than we have been able to in the past.
My final comment on the topic, Jeff, is 5 years ago, you could only get appraisal experience necessary to become an appraiser if another individual decided to give you access to that experience. Now, anyone can get that experience. You can go get it. There is no single individual standing in the way of you doing that. That is an enormous improvement. It's not easy to get. That's improper that it's not easy to get. You got to meet some criteria, but those are fully within your control. And that's just an enormous shift and a big lift to the industry. That is solving a problem in and of itself. So I think that is square one. And let's see where that gets us.
Can't argue with that. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the time horizon that you point out makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are relatively new options on the table. And so far, as measured by passing the licensing exam, the additional options put on the table are have been more successful than the traditional mentoring route, from that lens. And so I think give it more time to continue to play out and be an opportunity for people to come in makes a lot of sense.
Well, Jeff, that'll do it. Episode 93 in the books. We are fast approaching 100. I'm kind of excited to reach that milestone, just following through on a commitment that you and I made to one another, despite success or no success. So we'll keep at it. I look forward to seeing you next time. I hope you and the listeners have or had a great July 4th weekend.
Yep. Happy 4th. And until next time, thanks, Mark.